Hey, what's up you guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I'm going to be reading 1-star reviews of some of my favorite books. So I'm a little nervous about this because I know that especially some of my most favorite books are gonna have like really bad reviews from people because some of them were written kind of in that weird YA romance time where everybody that reads them now is like, these are insta-lovey, these are dumb, like these are crap kind of thing. So I mean, I'm not so much nervous as I am just, I think, unprepared for what to expect. So let's see how it goes. All right, so we're gonna check out Beautiful Creatures first because this is one of my most favorite series of all time. You guys know that. So I'm interested to see what exactly people thought about it. So it looks like only 4% of people out of everybody that's reviewed this has given it a 1 star, which is actually really cool. It warms my heart to see that most people actually really loved it and gave it 5 stars because I think this is one of my most favorite books in the entire series, the first book in general, so I'm interested to see what some people have to say. So let me go through and scroll a little bit. Another overhyped paranormal YA creation. When will I learn not to buy into hype? Just like so many readers, I gave into the favorable internet buzz and opened the book with an expectation of it to be something special. Unfortunately, Beautiful Creatures was just another painfully boring, overlong dud. Having finally finished this book with a high level of irritation and disappointment, I decided to check out the favorable reviews to see what people liked about the story. Turns out the most appreciated aspects of the book were an original love story told from a male POV, compare it to those other romances told from whiny girls' POVs, truly original paranormal lore, and small town southern setting. Personally, I found none of it particularly striking. Fair enough. If that's not what you're into, that's not what you're into. Like, I loved it because Ethan was a really lovable character. I found him to be very sweet, and it was very unique in terms of seeing a paranormal love story that involved a male character as the main perspective, because we do typically see females as the main perspectives, but to have Ethan as that main character was very different. And then also the small town southern setting, like that's not very common. I feel like a lot of times we see things in either the New England or like California-esque areas, and to see something like a small town in South Carolina was very different, and it added a lot in terms of kind of the mannerisms of a lot of people that were in the town and how things kind of were, because there is a very religious aspect to some of the characters and how they view the DeConnier family in particular. So I found it to be very fun. The story follows same old deadbeat formula, a paranormal / human pairing, uncovering of the mysterious partner's true nature, teens drawn to each other for some unknown reason. Even my hope for some kind of reincarnation twist didn't quite work out. Constant I can't be with you because it's dangerous back and forth, the inability to be together physically. Yeah, some of that played into it, more so in like book 2, but book 1 was like they're just trying to figure out what the heck's going on, like why they're having these dreams together. So that sounds a lot more like the issues I had with the second book as opposed to the first one. So I don't know where you got that stuff. Male POV is also not successful. I think the book would have been better if told in third person. At least the writer's inability to channel a voice of a 16-year-old boy would have been somewhat concealed. I disagree with that, but okay. As for Southern small town feel, I am pretty sure even Charlaine Harris writes it better in her trashy vampire books. In Beautiful Creatures, it never rings true and is based on old tired cliches of narrow-mindedness and drawl. But that's because most small town southern areas are like that. Like, I thought it was pretty true to what I know of in small town communities like that. But even all these issues aside, the book is simply a too long, often pointless concoction. Yes, the world of casters, witches, is fairly new, but it is never too interesting or believable and can't justify the book's 600-page length. Okay, fair enough. I thought it was perfectly fine, but, you know, differing opinions, differing thoughts, not a huge deal. I'm still waiting to give the writers some credit for their apparent effort to write a better book than the majority of YA writers with a more intricate backstory and better developed characters, but for me personally, this book was just an excruciatingly long and boring read. The chances of me ever reading the sequel are non-existent. Okay, whatever. Note to those who love the book and feel compelled to leave me comments explaining it to me why I'm wrong disliking it. Spare me, I know exactly why you love this book. This is only my opinion and I have a right to express it. And you do. Totally understand that. I don't go to your 5-star reviews and try to convince you are wrong liking it. Move on to your next paranormal romance instead. I have a handy list for you of the books you are sure to love. Shiver, hated that. Hush Hush, hate that one now that I've moved away from it. Evermore, don't think I've read that. Fallen, hated that one. Marked, Never read that series. My mom and my grandmother loved it. Blue Bloods, read that one a long time ago and I didn't like it. Jekyll Loves Hyde, never read it. Personal Demons, never read it. Angel Star, never read it. Halo, never read it. You can thank me later. So this one was from 2012, it looks like. Phew, I'm glad that's over. I have read some dismal books in the young adult paranormal genre, books that have been boring or annoying or have offended me, but I think I can honestly say this is up there with some of the worst books I've ever read. Everything about this book aggravated me in one way or another, from the ridiculous length of it to the supposedly male protagonist. Supposedly? What does that mean? I couldn't even concentrate on the story for the most part because I kept picturing Ethan as a 30-something woman. Why? How did you get that from Ethan? I don't understand that. There are some things I'm going to rant about that may not have bothered me several years ago before Twilight came along, waving its cliche banners. Fair enough. Well, unfortunately, I can only tell you what I thought of this book now, not speculate on what I might have thought if I read it a few years earlier. Okay, that's nice. I would appreciate that from your kind of a review. So let's get the whole this is like every other paranormal young adult book thing out of the way. There were one or two additions to the witchy aspect of it that felt somewhat original, but the general pattern of this novel with the romance and the carbon copy characters was predictable and boring. No one likes a boring read, and it's especially annoying when the book is nearly 600 pages long. Shall I check the usual paranormal YA criteria off for you? Small town? Check. New girl? Check. Boring, holier than thou protagonist? Check. Ethan's not holier than thou. He actually absolutely hates a lot of the stuff that's involved with that. Like Link's mother, his best friend's mom, he doesn't like her because she thinks that she's the holier than thou character. I don't know where people think that Ethan is a holier than thou character because he's just not. Everlasting love after a very small amount of time? Check. I would disagree with it. This is a series where it seems like it's a short time because a lot of stuff happens in the first book, but if you look at the timeline between when they first start having these dreams about each other to when they actually have feelings for each other, it's like 9 months. So it's quite a bit of time between the two to where their relationship would have blossomed. So I think that a lot of people think it's a small amount of time because it all happens within one book, but it's really not if you look at the plot. And I totally understand though why people would think that because it does happen all in the first book, but it's just not the case. I don't know if this counts as insta-love, but it certainly counts as insta-weird obsession full of laughable musings like there's just something about her that makes me know it's meant to be. Hopefully it's obvious that that's not a direct quote. I'll give you that. It definitely did feel like a weird obsession for a little while because of the dream thing, and it kind of just, it did leave a bad taste in my mouth at first when I first reread it in 2018, but I still love it. I don't know why. Even though I hate insta-love so much. This was one that I think that because of the timeline aspect of the story, I was able to forgive it because it was a weird obsession, but they didn't actually build a relationship until much later in the book when it had been like 9 months of time between the beginning of the story and when they actually got together. I thought that this book might be a little more original because of the uncommon choice to have a male protagonist, but everything is still exactly the same. Now, though, instead of a girl next door type, you have a boy next door type who sails along in his faultlessness, constantly comparing himself to the less intelligent and morally questionable beings he must interact with every day. I don't see that, but okay. Ethan even treats us to a rare bout of what I can only call male slut-shaming. He criticizes his male peers for having one-track minds and wanting to get off with girls when he is looking for something more meaningful. Good for him, but why does that make him any better than the rest? Honestly, I don't remember if he does that. He is actually an exact male version of many paranormal YA protagonists who criticize the popular girls for being more relaxed with their sexuality. Again, I don't think that he does that. I don't feel like he's ever done that. I mean, he didn't necessarily like a lot of the popular girls that were in his school, but that's because he kind of had a thing with one of them at one point and now she won't leave him alone kind of thing. I don't think he really ever slut-shamed anybody, so I don't know where anybody would have gotten that. Not only that, but he also insults the other members of his southern US town. The novel plays heavily on southern stereotypes and portrays almost everyone but Ethan as being incredibly stupid. Yeah, okay. Ethan sneers at everyone. He's obviously smarter, has his morals in the right place, and is just downright awesome in comparison. Okay, I'll give you that. I think that's true. He makes it no secret from the very first chapter that he considers himself above them. He even goes so far as to announce that he doesn't have an accent because he was raised by intelligent people. Yeah, I would agree with that to an extent, but I think that a lot of it too is that his family was kind of looked at as kind of almost outsider-like because his mom was from the area, I think, and then she moved away and then they moved back, and she and Ethan's father were kind of on the weird side of things. Like, they both kind of focused a lot in history, and that Ethan's mother also was not really involved with a lot of the community aspects, which is why that I think a lot of the town kind of saw him and his family as outsider-like. So I think more so the reason he's like that is because the whole town has kind of looked at him as odd, and it's because of the way his mom had been when she was still around. And it was predictable. We don't even need to meet Lena or even hear her name to realize she is the one Ethan will end up with. Yeah, true. As soon as one of Ethan's classmates asks, "Have you seen the new girl?" and Ethan begins to wonder if she'll be hot, we know from that point where the whole thing is heading. Sometimes I'll admit there's some fun to be had watching a couple angst it out together, even though you know they'll be together eventually. But before we even knew her name, I can't even say that I stopped caring, because truthfully, I never even started. This whole book was just not good. I'll give you that. I do think that the second time I read it, I was kind of iffy with the whole thing of, like, him being like, oh, the new girl, I'm gonna end up with her, and that's gonna be the whole story. I mean, we kind of, though, already got that at the very beginning with the dream, and it's weird. I will agree with you there. It kind of leads back to that idea of the instant obsession, instant love thing that I think is kind of still iffy, but I don't know. I think that by the time the end of the series comes around, it's still something that makes my heart happy. I think that they genuinely are a good couple. It was kind of obvious, though, that was going to be what was going to happen in the series. Okay, so we're going to move away from that one, and I'm going to do one other book. I think I'm going to go with The Poppy War, because that's one I've been thinking of a lot recently, because I've been seeing R.F. Kuang on Twitter all the time with talking about the Burning God, and I'm still obsessed with that series. So I think I'm just going to go with that one and see what people have to say, because that's a really high fantasy that a lot of people have really liked, and I want to see what some people don't like about it, because I can understand why they wouldn't. Okay, so let's take a look at what the overall ratings of this book are. So if we look at the rating details, looks like only about 1% of the people that have reviewed this have given this a 1 star, which is also really good. It looks like the majority have given this a 4 star, which is interesting, and the 5 stars are very, very close second. So obviously a lot of people do seem to like this, so the people that gave this 1 stars are in the minority, but their opinions are still valuable. So let me see if I can find a 1 star that talks about this. I haven't been this annoyed with a book since The Bells, and like then, I see myself in the minority with this one. Basically, we have a generic military fantasy, frustratingly vague setting and historical background. The mythical elements are mentioned when needed to further the plot. I would agree with that. Fang, I want power. Runin is an unlikable protagonist. We get little help in understanding her relation to said power. Highly inconsistent characterization, lazy writing. I get that this is a debut, but all characters sound like modern-day teens, no differentiation between them, particularly during her interactions with the Kike Squad. I still don't know how to pronounce that. In part 2, very few have a backstory, and none of them rises to above their stereotypical war pal status. Kuang seems to blatantly use the historical events to give her novel a narrative frame. Not much is approved upon. Fantasy-wise, not so keen on the drugs-enhanced magic system, but hey, it had to further justify the title, and it beats explaining how the hell they use their powers in a more creative way. Rules of anatomy do not apply, no obvious consequences to destroying one's uterus, but it's fantasy, so you can poof it out of existence with some yummy juice and you're good to go. In the elite Synagogue Academy, part of the story is not done well. The war itself is not done well. Some of the battle scenes are laughable. Everything is feeling and seeing from the protagonist's perspective. The dialogue is constantly being used to explain things in a forced, unnatural way. Loads of telling, but no showing. You find out things because Rin remembers having read them, or someone gives her yet another history lesson. Good for her. Speaking of Rin, as far as the plot goes, her superpowers are behaving like a whiny brat, holding grudges, blushing at the sight of Alton. That is when she's not busy eloquently challenging his or anyone's authority. Fuck you, she said, fuck you. Yeah. Comparisons, repetitions, and other silly phrases meant perhaps to sound poetic. It was only a corpse that was being preserved in chemicals like pickled vegetables. It was a song of vengeance. It was a horrible song. It was a wonderful song. It was utter carnage. It was beautiful. The Empress was beautiful, lovely and terrible all at once. Not a fan of this type of writing. I would disagree with that one just because I like that, but totally differing opinions there. Most importantly, like in The Bells, I find the message of the novel monstrous or poorly dealt with at best. The killing of some justifies the killing of many others. The good thing about the third-person narration, in my perspective, is that it helps with the world building. The all-knowing, all-seeing voice can describe whatever settings, characters, or facts in however much detail it feels necessary to tell the story. That is why I find Darrow's point of view in the Red Rising series absolutely ridiculous. Don't know what that is. And I'm not going to click on any spoilers because I know there's a lot of people that haven't read this series yet. Kwong goes in the opposite direction. She chooses the third-person narration that, rather than being an all-seeing, knowing, what have you kind of perspective, is situated at the protagonist's eye level. What she knows, we know. What she sees, we see. We have more lines on how the character feels about the events of the battle than the actual battle. I read that the enemy has some sophisticated siege weaponry, and I want to know more about that. And I'm pissed because I can deal with vague, but not when I'm presented with the fantasy world inspired by a historical setting I know little about. And this will not do. I will finish the book, but so far I'm not happy camper. So this is like her whole like process of going through the whole thing. So I would agree to an extent with that last part, with the fact that it's very vague and we only see everything from Rin's perspective. In a third person narrative, it's a very limited kind of perspective. It's actually, I think, what's called third person limited perspective, as opposed to third person omniscient, which would be an all-seeing narration kind of tactic that this reviewer had explained. Personally, I think that works better for this kind of a story, because I would want to see things from Rin's perspective. I would want to understand what she thinks of each individual thing. So this is like a personal preference kind of thing, I think, in terms of the story, but I do understand how that is so very frustrating, because it does make things a lot more vague. It does make things a little bit harder to understand in terms of what the significance of different things is within this world. I totally get where this person is coming from, but I would have to disagree. So then earlier she had said, I approached the book with zero expectations and still I'm feeling underwhelmed. After being slightly pissed at that part 1 read too much like a Name of the Wind knockoff because of the Elite Academy setting and lots of other narrative patterns, with Rin a strong character, only to go back at the beginning of part 2 to being juvenile, so much so that her internal monologue got really annoying. I know that there's a war going on, but the characterization is inconsistent. I don't know if I can speak to that because I don't remember exactly how Rin acted. I do know that she got very frustrated a lot of times in the academy, and that's because she was just trying to prove herself, and she kept getting knocked down because of her status, and she was getting pissed by it. That's really a lot of what I remember of her being at the academy. And then the very first thing she had said about this is, it's violent, yes, but given the protagonist's age and accessible language, I'd categorize this as YA. Oh no, that's like saying Nevernight is YA. Regardless of its context, the fictionalized source conflict reads like a very generic fantasy war. I think the author bit more than she could chew, and she compensates by telling and not showing. See, this is a very, very hard, story to wrap your head around. So I would agree with some of the things that this person says in terms of it being a little inconsistent at times and it feeling very vague because of the third-person limited perspective, but I would highly disagree that this is by any means, an awful story, and that R.F. Kuang bit off more than they could chew. I feel like this is still something that it's just a difference in perspective. It's a difference in opinion, and I respect it. I will agree with some of the things that Anna had said of this book, but I don't know. I think that I enjoyed it just a lot more. I wish I hadn't read this. Maybe I should have done my due diligence before picking up the Poppy War. I didn't. I just saw that it was 1, an Asian-inspired fantasy, 2, even rarer, actually written by an Asian American author, and 3, highly rated on Goodreads. And that was enough to get me really excited, so I immediately picked up a copy and started reading. The first few chapters are good, and Rin, a dark-skinned peasant girl who busts her ass studying to get herself into an elite military academy, is the kind of heroine you can root for. But the entire section at the military academy with school antics was both boring and juvenile. There's a major character who is a teacher and makes fart sounds with his elbow. I think that was interesting to include that character, because he offset everything that the military academy was standing for, and I think that was his purpose. And he also was a way to bring in the magic aspect and the mythology that was involved within this world. So it made sense to have a kooky character, because we needed a kooky character. We needed a comic relief of sorts with all the craziness going on. It should be noted that I was under the mistaken impression that I was reading a YA fantasy while I was reading the academy part. Even though I wasn't enjoying the book by then, I wanted to continue reading and give it a chance to improve, because representation matters, even if flawed, and I did love Harry Potter and Alana when I was younger, even though I haven't read them in years, so I suppose that I can't judge accurately whether the reason I dislike the school part in the Poppy War is because it is badly written or because it's a trope I've grown out of as a whole. Okay, fair enough, I understand that. Then I realized this was an adult book, and I couldn't understand why Kuang had begun the book with action, with battles or war or something, and fleshed out Rin's background through flashbacks and other devices. The school part truly reads like HP fanfiction, complete with an Asian Draco Malfoy that doesn't belong in the same book as the rest of this novel. It created pacing problems and did not fit the tone of the rest of the Poppy War. Okay, I'll give you that. I feel like a lot of the school part was actually I liked it in general. I would have actually liked to have seen it, in the story, but I do think that I would have liked to have seen the book start off with a bang with a battle kind of thing, and then kind of seeing things flash back towards the stuff that Rin had gone through. But at the same time, I did like a lot of what the Academy scenes had done, because it showcased Rin's strength as she got through all of her classes, her relationship built with Kate, and the kind of animosity there was with Nezha. I think that those particular scenes really impacted the entirety of the story, and to have it not really be there, I think would have really damaged the story, because we wouldn't have really understood those kinds of relationships. Once the war starts, the book gets progressively darker and faster paced. At first I was happy that something was actually happening, and I thought this was a sign the book was picking up. Then how the world building was handled really became an issue for me. Nikon, Rin's country, is a stand-in for China, while Mugen, the nation attacking them, is based off Japan. The war that Kwong narrates is based on the Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 45, though the world she makes isn't adorned with the modern technology to match. With no guns, cars, telephones, or radio, Rin's setting feels more medieval in conception. Think horses, scrolls, and armor. I actually think that worked really well, because this is kind of one of those stories that I think would have been better had it been in more of a medieval setting. I feel like, though, I would agree to an extent where I would have wished there would have been some more technology involved with it to give it kind of more of that historical placement. But I do understand that this is a fictional world, so there's going to be some kind of medievalness to it. Like, this was basically all fictionalized, but based in history for R.F. Kuang. So I understand why they basically just made it more medieval, but I would agree that I would have liked to have seen a little bit more like guns or something along the lines of technology to put us in the real historical context of the war that's being referenced. The line between fiction and reality is always blurred. Stories can be truth or fiction, or more likely, some shade of in between. For the most violent and brutal events in human history, nonfiction books and documentaries are crucial for remembrance and understanding. Fictionalized takes on these events needed to be handled carefully, but are also important. I'm read and watched realistic historical fiction about tragic or violent events, and when it's done right, it's extremely powerful. What makes me uncomfortable with the Poppy War is that it's fantasy. Gods and magic play a large part in the story. Nikon and Mugen are thinly veiled approximations of real nations. The fall of Golden Nice is really the story of the Nanjing Massacre. The research facility Rin and Alton set up is supposed to be Unit 731. Some of the most sickening, abhorrent instances of violence Kuang inflicts on characters in her book are things that happen to real people, as documented in photographs and first-person accounts. Kuang is incredibly graphic about these details, and she's not using her imagination, but rather history to write these scenes. To me, it feels exploitative and incredibly tasteless, to use other people's pain to make your fantasy novel more exciting. It's a line that I think shouldn't be crossed. I can respect that. I can respect the uncomfortableness that would come from something like that, but at the same time, if this is supposed to be a scene that's based in history, you have to make it a scene that is reminiscent of that. So if you don't, like, if you have a story that's based in the Holocaust, you can't not talk about the fact that these people that are in a Holocaust-like situation are being tortured. Like, that doesn't, if that's not discussed, if that's not shown, the kind of things that they went through, it almost doesn't give any validation to what really happened in that time period. I think that kind of is what the point was of Kuang really using those kinds of scenes, is to really show the damage and the nastiness that this war has basically done in remembrance of what exactly happened in history. The utility of it for remembrance and analysis is debatable. I don't know if the casual American reader of this book will have read The Rape of Nanking or been to the Hall of Remembrance in Nanjing and understand how many Asian people from countries Japan attacked during the war still feel anger and pain about the brutal war crimes committed. Perhaps I'm more upset than I should be because I'm also Chinese American and I care too much about how these things are represented and handled, because let's face it, the audience for this work is going to be majority white Americans who might not understand just how much of this is fact, not fiction, as the extent of how much this is taken straight from primary sources isn't made explicit in the blurb or in some sort of author note. Okay, I can respect that. I totally understand that this obviously has some very strong impact on this individual reviewer, and it is entirely possible that just because I don't understand the impact of what these things did in the historical context, how that affects people now. I totally respect that. I understand. What I said earlier, I think, though, may still stand, and like they said, it is a debatable topic, but I will admit that I likely do not know anything of what happened in that particular historical time, so I cannot speak as to whether or not this is good or bad or anything. I know comparisons between atrocities is ridiculous, but since it happened during the same time period is more familiar to Americans, I wonder how a fantasy novel that draws directly from first-hand accounts of torture inflicted on people in Auschwitz or war crimes committed by Nazis in order to entertain its readers and justify the main character's genocidal arc would be received, and if it would seem just as tasteless and ill-advised. Okay, I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, if you're gonna, I feel like it's kind of the same thing. Like, if you're gonna also write something that's based in Auschwitz or during the Holocaust, like, I think a lot of people would also write the kinds of horrors that went on with that, and it would still probably get attacked for it because of the amount of times that, you know, things would be too graphic or something like that. Like, I think that in the way I would see it, I would see both as, you know, super graphic, but important in terms of talking about the amount of torture that really went on. But again, this is something that, you know, I never went through these things. I never experienced these things myself, so I can't say whether or not it's tasteless or tasteful because I truly don't know. I just think in terms of from a reading standpoint, if I was to read something that was going to be placed in these time periods, I would want to know just how badly these people were treated so I can understand that kind of a time period a little bit better, so I understand how truly evil these kinds of people were that were hurting these innocent individuals. I think that's kind of more of what I'm thinking of. Oh, and by the way, everything has been fantasy renamed to things like Asgmador and Nasseron. On the map at the front of the book is just Europe flipped backwards. Okay. I don't know what that is. It's not that the Poppy War is extremely violent or draws heavy inspiration from history that is really the problem. It's the way the world building is executed and handled in relation to the real world. Magic and gods are real, but Kwong, instead of using her imagination as fantasy authors are supposed to, merely changes the names of countries and cities while using actual atrocities that happen to real people as her plot. Kwong, I know, has the academic credentials, studying for a Chinese history MA, to back up her reasoning. Even so, to me, her story of a drugged-up X-Men teenagers making stupid decisions completely failed to be a respectful, sensitive, or appropriate handling of the Nanjing Massacre or Unit 731 in fiction. I think it's well written. I think it does talk about these things very, very openly, and I totally understand the personal impact that this had had on this reviewer because it does talk about their personal connection to that history and how they think that that wasn't represented well, considering that both Kwong and this author of this review are, you know, how they relate to this, you know, the heritage that they come from. And so I respect this review. I would disagree with some of it, but I do understand where a lot of what they're saying comes from because they feel that the heritage aspect of it and the history of their heritage and what exactly happened to their people was poorly represented. And I'm never going to say to anyone that is in that kind of group where they, you know, identify with the people that were involved in the story, especially from a historical context. I will never say that those people are wrong because I am not of that group. I'm not of that particular minority or from that particular era. So I'm never going to say that they're wrong because I don't know anything about it. So that's all I'm going to really do in terms of this video because those reviews were very long and I'm already been sitting here for about 45 minutes almost. So I'm going to end that here. But if you guys would like to see more one-star reviews of some of my favorite books, let me know. I would totally love to do this more because I think that these reviews actually are not too bad, and I think that there's been a lot of credit where it's due, and these reviewers that I've seen so far have definitely picked out things that either I didn't think about before, or they may have picked out things that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm going to respect their opinions regardless because everybody has an opinion. They're all valid. Whether or not I agree with them is no difference. So that's just kind of how it is. But I thought this would be fun to do because I've seen other people do this and I wanted to see my own reactions to some of these one-star reviews as I've never really read reviews for my favorite books in this way. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys.